All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast, and we got an incredible show for you today. We have a special guest, a returning guest. Her name is Hayley Mitchell, and she's talking about the pros and the cons of short-term rentals, Ben, for property investors. What else do we cover?
And Bryce, what's making property news, big news out of New South Wales around no grounds eviction. So I'll be sharing and unpacking the legislation in terms of how it looks at bullet point level. And then finally, Bryce, there's a beautiful, heartwarming story that just adds value in terms of why you and I do what we do. And we just love hearing these types of stories. So we're going to learn more about Tom's journey with us.
Yes, it is a very heartwarming story. Let's rip into the show.
Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast, and welcome back to you too, mate. How are you?
Mate, I'm well. How are you?
I'm good. Are you well because you helped Richmond with their number one draft pick and you're going to claim it as a good win, or are you just thinking take 4 points no matter what?
Look, I like to build a winning culture, as Fly would say. I think, we like to breed winners. So anytime we're winning, and the consequences of that is what it is.
All right. Well, you noticed the 3-0 Dockers, 3 as in third on the ladder, 3-0 Dockers.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. You didn't notice that, did you?
So no, look, mate, if the Pies are unlikely to make final, so I'll get on the Freo bandwagon with you. I'll help ride you to...
That's because your wife follows Freo.
A straight set exit.
It's good for household harmony. That's why you're following Freo. So let's be honest.
Yeah, at the start of the year, Jane says, I'm really not into Freo much anymore. I said, I'll bring you across to the Pies. We'll always, we'll take all sorts.
But she's got too much class and dignity and strength of mind to do that, mate. So there you go.
All right, what's on the docket today, mate? What's on the docket?
Oh, mate, we got an epic guest, returning guest, to talk about a topic that we get a few requests around today, Ben. So we're going to talk about the pros and cons and everything you need to know, Ben, about short-term rentals. So stick around for that. It's a ripper. Before we get there, I found this Mindset Minute theme today, Ben, that I want to share. And it's Jack Canfield. Remember Jack Canfield, the Chicken Soup for the Soul creator?
Yes. I remember those little stories. They're wonderful.
He has here's one secret that separates winners from losers. Let's have a little listen to this, Ben.
I'm going to show you the one secret that separates winners from losers more than anything else. If this $50 bill were available, who would want it? All right, now don't go away yet. Come back. Tell us your name.
Debbie.
What did Debbie do that no one else in the audience did? She got up and she took action. See, too many times we sit around and we wait and we hope and we dream and we affirm and we pray and we meditate and we do all that. And all that's important. It's part of the process. But at a certain point, the opportunity shows up. And if you don't act, you get to sit and not have $50, okay?
So, Ben, Debbie got up and took action, right? So why am I putting this in this spot? Because you and I are spending 505 episodes now trying to get people to take action, and it's simple as that. So for those of you that were listening and you weren't watching, basically it was a crowd of people, and a ton of people put their hand up, but only one person got out of the audience, walked up and grabbed the $50 out of Jack's hand. So grab the opportunity.
So don't be shy in taking action also, because the other people might have thought about it then, all those eyeballs on me and I look greedy. Yeah, but there's a story in that in terms of it's not necessarily greedy. It's just about taking action.
Debbie got up and she took action. She grabbed the opportunity. That is what we are suggesting that you do too, folks. Ponder that as you go into the weekend or whenever you're listening to this podcast. Hey, Ben, let's get into the topic of today's show. We're talking with a returning guest. Her name is Hayley Mitchell. We're talking about the pros and cons and everything you need to know around short-term rentals. Let's cut to the interview you and I recently had with Hayley. All right, Ben, we've got a very special guest today. We are chatting with Hayley Mitchell. She started in real estate in 1999 and has built a successful career working in all facets of property management, including owning her own business. She's a fully licensed estate agent and has won numerous awards, including the REIV Property Manager of the Year twice, Ben, and was named one of the elite top 50 industry influencers in, ready for this, Ben, 2017, 2018, 2019 and 2022. She now shares her knowledge with others through her training and events company Mitchell PT, as well as running BnB Property Managers. Hayley is a property investor and is making a return today. Welcome back to the Property Couch, Hayley.
Oh, thanks for having me.
It's always a pleasure to hang out with you. You've got so much wisdom in this space. But my only question for you is, you've managed property for over 20 years and you've seen the highs and lows that come with short-term rentals. So can you share why you've personally decided to include numerous short-term rentals as part of your own portfolio, instead of renting them long-term?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I bought some little tiny properties in Fitzroy a couple of years ago, actually over 10 years ago. And when I say tiny, like hotel room size. So they were on long-term rentals for quite a few years, and I decided to put them onto short-term probably about 6 years ago. And the reason why I did that is I actually rented one of them to a long-term tenant, and then when I went around and did the routine, I'm like, doesn't look like anyone's living here, but there's a towel and there's, milk in the fridge, and I'm like, he's put it on short-term. So he'd been subletting and put it on short-term, and I looked up his results, and he was getting $115 a night, and I was charging him $280 a week. So I thought, well, if you can do it, I can do it. So once I moved out, I tested it and I did it myself, and and haven't looked back since then. So those properties are great little earners. They're bringing in, between that 35 and 40,000 a year for tiny little studios in Fitzroy.
Well, that kind of sets the scene for the conversation that we're having today. You and I bumped into each other earlier in the year at ARIC. I had this conversation with you. We had a little chat, and I thought, we haven't really deep dived into short-term rentals in our podcast, so we're going to do that. But before we go there, you've previously appeared on the podcast, episode 248 back in 2019. That was in September, and also episode 332, which was the 1st of April 2021. And back then you were talking about lots of changes and the 138 changes, and then what were coming, and then we got you back on and we talked about what had just happened. But what we didn't do in any of those conversations is have a conversation about your money backstory, Hayley. So I wonder if we could just for a little bit, just talk about what money was like growing up for you. Did you have conversations about money growing up over the dinner table?
It's an interesting one. I don't think we necessarily did. But my mum and dad both had their own businesses. So mum was a law clerk, title searching, and dad was a builder. So always kind of in that property game. And I guess I just kind of saw their lifestyle of running their own businesses and achieving what they achieved throughout their working lives. And it kind of just ingrained in me, I think. But it was always property at the background there. Mum more in the legal sense and dad more on the tools. So, yeah, I guess it was just a bit of a known conclusion that I was going to end up down that path. And my brother was actually a builder. He worked with dad, he worked with mum for a while, and then he went and got his real estate agent's rep at the time, and he worked as a property manager. And that's how I got into it, because he said, I think you'd be good at this. He hated it. Did not like it at all. But he did a few years, and he goes, I can get you a job where I'm working. Would you be interested? And I went, yeah, let's do it. And I haven't looked back. Like from the day I started, it was just, that was me. And I know a lot of people kind of get into property management and it's more of a job. For me, it was always going to be a career, and I always look for that next step of where I can get to where I want to be. So, it's been an amazing journey. I've loved it.
Now, Hayley, can we go back to sort of when you're in your teenage years and you're just starting to experience and understand money as something that allows for consumption and use and so forth? What was it like in terms of, did you get a pocket money? Did you get yourself a part-time job? How did you start to think about money and organise how you ran your own finances?
So I've been a horse rider since I was 8 years old. So I wanted a horse. I was one of those crazy kids that just pony. So mum and dad bought me a pony. And over the years, I had more and more horses, and, mum and dad always paid for them all. Now I know how expensive they are because I've got 7 of them. But it was really interesting. I remember I wanted a new saddle for my horse, and the saddle I wanted was $1,200 secondhand. And I remember saying to Dad, I want that saddle. My horse has a bad back. He needs a certain shape. And Dad said to me, I'll buy that saddle, but you go and get yourself a part-time job and you pay me back each week. So I did. I got a job at a local bakery. It was when you could first work. I think I was 15, and I was earning about $20 a week. And each week I'd come to Dad and I'd hand him the $20. And at the end of however long it took me to pay him back, I paid him back, and he said to me, it wasn't about the money. And I'm like, yep. And he goes, well done. And that was it. So yes, they paid for everything for my horses in the upkeep and the farrier and all of that. But if I wanted anything extra, I had to pay for it. So since then, I've just always had jobs from the age of 15. I've never had a space in my life where I haven't had a job since then.
And how do you organise your finances? Do you did you start with a Dolomite account, or did you sort of think about how credit cards, debit cards, any of that sort of stuff? So tell us a little bit about sort of how you managed your banking.
I'm pretty old, so I was in the cash society.
Yep.
We were, right? I had my piggy bank. And all the cash kind of went into the jar, and if you wanted to go buy something, you went and bought it. So I can't even remember at what age I got a credit card. We had debit cards, but it was more about the cash society than that. If you had money in your jar, you could go out and spend it, and if you didn't, you didn't. So I was definitely probably in around my 20s when I actually got my first credit card and learnt the rules about having to pay them off every month.
So, Hayley, was it fair to say that it's more about experiences than conversation? Because, you got to observe your dad being a builder, running his own business. Your mum was in the law field. Your dad just had that example there where there was where it was all about the experience of teaching you a lesson through the process. So, growing up, was it more about showing rather than talking? Because you're now a property investor. You've now run your own business for some time. Surely some of that, is the fruit not falling far from the tree.
Yeah, I think it was showing. It was growing up. I never felt like I couldn't have what I wanted, but I knew if I wanted it, I had to work for it. And that was just always what was drilled into us as kids. So,
right.
If you want something, absolutely you can get it, but this is what we have to do to achieve it. So, there was never anything I really was left wanting for, but I knew that if I actually wanted it, then I had to work. So I drill that into my kids as well. So I've got an 8 and 10-year-old. And if they want something, they can work for it. They can help do it, and it's I think a really important lesson, so that then kids aren't always sitting there going, bank of mum and dad. An interesting one. My daughter really likes one of my apartments. And I said and she goes, I'm going to live here when I'm older. I said, are you? I said, well, you probably can. I said, but you'll have to pay me rent. And she said, oh, no, don't worry about that. By the time I move in another, 8-10 years, you would have paid it off by then. I'm like, oh, no, I don't think so, hun. You are going to have to pay rent if you want to live in mum's apartment because it's currently making money. So it's teaching them those sort of things as well where, from that young age that they know that they have to work.
And what was the spark for property investing? Where was the point where because you've got a number of properties in your portfolio, but there was if we rewind back to somewhere in your journey, there was something that came up for you that said, I'm going to go down this path, or was it just were you an accidental accumulator of properties?
Yeah, my first property, I was working at an agency in South Yarra, and I wanted to buy an investment property in the area because I'd been managing everyone else's properties for so long. And that was my first one into the market, so that was really good. And then the other ones were kind of accidental in a way. So I had the two in Fitzroy. I had one of my owners that I was managing, and he rang me and he said, I want to sell these. And I said, how much do you want? And he told me, and I went, well, sounds fair. And I said, well, if I buy them off you and we don't go through an agent, can we knock $5,000 off the price? Because you'd pay that on marketing and commission. He said, yep, no problem. And we signed them up and off we went. So, little things like that. I wasn't in the market necessarily to buy properties, but when they came about and I ran the numbers, I went, they make sense. They'll pay for themselves. And then I've had a couple of others over the years as well.
Fantastic. I mean, it's just a good story about just, one step in front of the other and walking a mile, seeing a mile. And of course, it sounds like obviously property's in your DNA.
Yeah.
So that's also helped. Having family members as builders has given you a bit of an understanding as well. So a good whole round story. Obviously today we want to, double click and focus in on short-term rental accommodation. So, and I think, our community is going to be really enjoying this conversation because we've got a lot of existing property investors. And so why should people consider short-term rental accommodation over longer-term rental accommodation, Hayley?
I think it's got to come down on property by property scenario and also the appetite for investment. What I mean by that, if you go to a financial advisor, for example, and they say, are you low, medium or high risk investor, where do you want your strategy to be? You don't want someone that wants a low risk, that doesn't really have an appetite for risk, to be going into the short term, because it can be brilliant, but it also can be difficult, and you don't necessarily get the returns on every property that you might think you do. Definitely the profile of the owner is really, really important to me as well. So when I'm putting on new clients now, I interview them to make sure that they're going to be the right type of client for this strategy, because I don't want to have someone that comes on board that needs a set figure per month, because some months I'll make them double that figure, but some months I'll make them half. So if they need a certain amount each month, it's not going to be the right strategy for them. So I really interview and try and educate my clients. So rather than just going out going, yeah, I'll sign you up, I reckon, because I'm only referral based, probably about half the owners that get forwarded to me, I actually suggest not to go long term, or to sell the property, for example, if it's not going to meet the criteria that I think it will get long term or short term. So yeah, case by case.
How do you cancel them when they're probably, they've come to you and they've said, oh, I've read an article, a friend told me they're cashing it in, insert some sort of catalyst for wanting to do it, and you're trying to caution them out of that. And in your experience, you're looking for patterns of behaviour or certain signs, like you said, risk profile and the high need for certainty and all those sorts of things. How... are some of those conversations a bit more difficult than people would think, trying to talk someone against their will when they've got their mind stuck on it? Or are they pretty malleable when they are talking to someone who's experienced in the game?
I think most people appreciate my honesty because, I'll give you an example. I had a lovely lady contact me recently. She got a beautiful little single fronted house, close to Melbourne. She's overseas owner. She's self-funded retiree. She's had long-term renters paying a really low rent because she really liked them and didn't want to put the rent up. And then she got land tax bill, $38,000 for the year. Her rent is nowhere near that amount of money, right? And she said to me, can you make me more so I can keep it? And I ran my numbers and I said, look, potentially I can, but I said I can't guarantee it. So I said, I would hate to say to you, let's go spend $20,000 furnishing and setting it up. Let's build it for the 3 to 6 months that it'll take to actually get the constant income stream that I think. And then maybe or maybe not, I will make you more money than what you could potentially get long term if you put the rent up to market. So when I ran the numbers, I actually said to her, this is not the right strategy for you, because I said it's too risky and you're going to have to put money into it and you haven't got that money to put into it. So I said my suggestion would be get your rent to market and keep the tenants in here, or sell it. And she's decided to sell it because she just can't hold it with the land tax. And that's a really sad scenario. But I know that there would have been other short-term providers that would have said, yeah, great, let's go. Let's make as much money out of her as we can. But I don't want that pressure of someone making such a big financial decision and it's the wrong one. And with short-term, you just can't guarantee what return they're going to get.
And Hayley, just in that example, that 38 is just on that property, on that land value alone.
Yep.
So obviously there's a significant value there. So yeah, it mightn't be a small property that we're talking about, because I would have thought, well, I've seen them in the 10 to 12,000 range, but 38 says to me that's a bit of prime real estate potentially there. Absolutely. That's going to now be realised. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but it's just not getting the return. With the rents being low, older style property, long-term renter. Yeah, it was a really sad situation. She was wanting to keep that property for a very long time, but unfortunately it's not going to continue.
So Hayley, what's some of the questions that you do often get asked by people who are just thinking about it? Like what are the most common questions that you might experience them that they want to know the answer to straight away?
There is so much to learn with short term. It's and all the platforms are different, and the way you do bookings is different. The most common one I probably get asked is how the percentages all work, like how the different platforms work. The other one is, how much money will you make me per night? And I actually say to them, I will make you between 30 and 35,000 a year. How I get that over the year doesn't matter. But just know that that's what I'll get you in the end, because I can't tell you you're going to get this per night, because I'll set it at this, but then I might drop the price if I don't have a booking, but then in peak you get this much. So we've got to look at it over an annual figure, not what the nightly price is going to be. And if I have someone that wants to control that nightly price with me, they're not going to work with me, because I literally log on every day and change my pricing if I don't have bookings. I'll change my minimum nights. I'll change everything. So I have to run on the fly, because it's quick. It's very quick.
That makes sense. And obviously that's meeting supply and demand, right, in a very sort of liquid market. What sort of uplift is that from the typical rent that they may enjoy in the long-term space?
Yeah, so if I can't get them double to triple the income, then it's not worth putting on.
Okay. Yeah.
So I need
doubles the threshold and then triples the cream. Okay.
Yeah. So if I make double, then they're going to make a little bit extra per month, or per whatever. But if I make triple, they're making pretty good money. They'll end up with about double. So yeah, my goal, if I can't see double to triple, then it's not worth putting on.
But it's important to conclude that 2x to 3x is a gross thing, isn't it? Because there's additional costs that I think that people need to factor in. So it'd be really nice to talk about two things. One is, okay, so everyone's seduced by 2x, 3x more income. Great, right? But it's the net. And that net also has to include the initial upfront capital outlay that you hinted at a couple of minutes ago, that when we're doing long term, there's the shelter, move your stuff in. But when you're going short term, you've got to be able to furnish it. And then there's degrees of furnishing. There's benchmark entry level furnishing, and then there's premium and everything in between. So can you talk a bit about the capital up front and then the net benefits that people get from these seduced increased incomes?
Yeah, so I do furnish properties for owners as well. So I've got budgets that I work with, and I've got my favourite shops. So I quite like it. I did one.
And they've got their favourite buyer, which is you.
Yeah, I love it. So I'll give you an example. I had an owner come to me, and I've actually never met her, but she was referred to me, and I spoke to her on the phone, and I said, yeah, I can furnish it. It was a 4-bedroom house in St Leonard, so large home, and I did her a budget of $35,000 to get it from start to finish. I actually came in under budget. I did $28,000, so I was pretty happy with myself. But I basically did everything for her from start to finish, and I said to her, just transfer the $35,000 to my trust account, and I'll go shopping. She did. Still never met her. Wow. And I just went shopping, and as I'm shopping, I'm sending her photos through WhatsApp going, I bought this, I've done this, and she's like, great. And then, it took me 48 hours to set it up. I was building IKEA furniture, the whole lot. Like, it's a massive job.
Wow.
And it came up really, really well. So she then asked if I would do her house where she lives. I'm like, I can't, because it's too much commitment. And it's different if I can just go in and do it. But if someone, is living there, they're going to want their own style. So I've referred her to someone else. But, that's an example of what we can do. My little one-bedders, they're a lot easier. You can usually set them up for about 10K, anywhere between sort of 8 and 10K, depending on the finishes. But you want the properties to have a feel and a style. My most fun one I did was I bought a warehouse conversion in Richmond in my self-managed super fund, and that's a great little apartment. And that was really fun for me to style, because I did a completely different style than I'd normally do, because it was a warehouse conversion. So you want to make the properties pop a little bit. They've got to have a little bit of something that makes them stand out. You just don't want no greenery, no colour, no comfiness. People want to go to a Airbnb or a short term instead of a hotel, because they want that feel like it's home. So that's really, really important. But it's important for owners to know that capital outlay at the beginning is significant. They've got to come up with that money in order to get it up to where it needs to be.
Because a ton of people will be thinking, oh, my living expenses are pretty tight at the moment. Interest rates have gone up. Let's go into the short-term pool so we can increase our income, but probably not necessarily thinking that you're going one step back to go 2 steps forward.
Correct.
And if you can't go the 1 step back, you can't go the 2 steps forward.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing is that, it does take us about 3 to 6 months to build our pricing. Because when you first put a property on, because it's got no reviews, it's slow to go. So you've got to drop your pricing, you offer it cheaper just to get it up and running. So that's really important for owners to know as well, that they're not going to necessarily put it on and get, really significant money for the first few months. It can take a bit of time to build. Once it builds, you're fine, you get that momentum, but it does take a little bit of time. So I always say to an owner, I need at least a 6-month commitment from you if I'm going to put a property on, because the first 3 months you're going to be going, what have I done? And then after that, you're going to be, okay, we're starting to get to where we need to be. So it's, really educating them so that they know what their financial outlay and commitment's going to be as well.
So Hayley, let's start to see whether we can break down some of those sort of costs. We've got the initial upfront, obviously in furnishing the property. We've got our platform fee. So what's a rough rule of thumb that we can use for platform fees?
15 to 20%.
Okay, 15. Yep.
Yeah, depending on which platform and whether you're a professional host or you're not.
Yep. Okay.
I mean, if you're a professional host, you get discounts?
No. So example, Airbnb, you've got a choice of how you're going to charge the commission. So if you've just got one property and you don't use a channel manager, then your guest will pay a 14% service fee and the host will pay a 3% plus GST roughly. So all up, it's about 17%. If you're a professional host though, you can't charge the guest a service fee. The host has to pay it, which is 15% plus GST. So what we do is we mark up our properties so that those fees are covered.
And just as a side note there, with sort of the introduction in Victoria of the 7.5% sort of levy on that, how does that then get charged? Is that sort of paid through Airbnb, or who's collecting that and who's basically making that payment?
So, short answer is I don't think they've quite worked it out yet.
Because it's coming into play next year.
January. I have been on a couple of discussions on this, so with government, and I'm not sure how it's going to work. At the moment, I'm thinking that they're saying the platforms have to pay the fee, but the trouble is that we don't all use platforms all the time. I do a lot of direct bookings now. So how are they going to get that income? I don't think the platforms are overly keen on paying that 7.5%. The other thing to think about is, let's say you've got a stay with a guest, right? And I'm just going to say, let's say they pay Airbnb $1,000. that owner doesn't get the $1,000 because
No.
you've got that 15% fee coming off. So all of a sudden that drops it down to $850. You got the cleaning fee coming off. So let's say that's $150. So that takes it to $700. So let's say that the owner then gets $700 out of that $1,000. They're actually charging or proposing to charge that 7.5% tax on the gross income, not the net. So it's not 7.5. It's more like 10 or 15, depending on how much your extra fees are. So, yeah, that was something that I kind of brought up in discussion as well, that, what are you charging it on? Are you charging on all the money that's paid? Because the owner doesn't get all that money. So it's going to be really interesting. I'm watching the space very carefully to see how it rolls out.
Well, you've got form in this space, Hayley. You're used to looking at reforms and changes, so it's in your lane.
Well, and also when they get too hard, like 133, you also get out of that lane because it makes sense because it's too hard. Let's keep going with those fees and charges. You hit another one there, which is basically the cleaning fee.
Yep.
Now, in terms of what's a good estimate of breakage and replacement sort of costs? Because I've got some friends who have a property down the coast, and they're amazed at the number of knives and forks that just get taken, and a few of those other things that sort of happen as part of these. Is that a common thing? Is that a common thing that people just want to take the towels because they like them, or they like the knives and forks, or whatever? Is that common?
Knives and forks. I bought this really cool one for my Richmond apartment, and people kept taking them, and so I've got a spare in the cupboard now because I thought it went from Freedom, and I thought if Freedom stops making it, then I have to replace the whole set. So I've got a spare, and every time I take a teaspoon, I take it from the spare set to make up my spare again.
So it is knives and forks. So that's a thing. It is a thing. There we go.
I don't know. It's weird. Yeah. Stains.
So roughly how much? How much should we provision in our sort of general gross estimate of costs?
Look, some properties are worse than others. Like my Richmond one, they were always breaking cutlery or taking cutlery or breaking plates or cups or things like that. But then I've got other properties where nothing goes at all. Like it's just nothing changes. Yeah. So I don't know. It's really odd. It's not a lot though. It really
maybe 2% of annual. 2% of annual turnover or something along those lines.
Yeah, and I generally will say, you've got to keep your towels and your sheets really fresh. So when they start getting really faded and you're washing them all the time and drying them all the time, you've got to replace them. But if you buy with quality, you'll get a good 12 months out of them. So I would say that, if you set aside almost like $500 a year just to replenish those sort of things, then you'd be pretty safe. But often you don't have to spend anything. But always have
for a good period of time. That would be ideal. Okay, so then let's talk about insurances. That would be another big one, I would have thought.
Yeah, so all my properties are insured. So obviously building insurance if they're houses, but most of mine are all apartments now, so they're all insured. So I just have landlord's insurance, which is a short stay policy, which is slightly more expensive. But yeah, definitely worth having. The other thing to think about is when you're a professional host, Verbo doesn't offer any insurance. Booking.com offers a small amount if they process certain payments. Otherwise, if you do them, you've got to do it. Airbnb's got very good insurance when it comes to any damages or issues that you have. So you're covered for that. But always have the backup just in case.
So tell me, just as a side note there, tell me the difference between a professional host and, say, a private host. What would you be classed as?
So I'm a professional host when you have over a certain amount of properties, and also if you use a channel manager. So what a channel manager software does is if you're only on Airbnb, for example, you actually don't need channel manager. But what a channel manager does is it will, you update one system and it will feed out to Booking.com, Verbo, your own booking site, Airbnb, all of them. Channel managers are so expensive. So mine's about...
Because they're aggregators effectively and push it out onto all platforms.
Yeah, I think I pay about $50 a month per property to use. Yeah. So some charge a percentage, some are per month. So yeah, it's a very big expense to run that sort of software as well. But that will then sync all your calendars, sync all your pricing, because otherwise you've got to log into each individual site and update it every time, and it's just not doable.
Yeah, okay. And then just so I'm sort of rounding this out, I'm assuming there will be some advertising or promotional additional cost that you might consider as part of getting into a regular flow of getting tenants?
Yeah, I don't. So I'm just on booking.com, Verbo. Oh, I'm probably on a heap more that I don't even know because our channel manager just goes out to all these different sites.
Yeah.
Had a couple of Google bookings too, so I think I'm on Google somehow. But yeah, we only use those platforms and we just pay per stay. So you're just paying a percentage back to the platforms per stay.
Yeah. And so you mentioned just a moment ago that you sometimes get some direct bookings. Is that so because you have a website with a direct feature of and then that links into those Airbnb environments, or are they sort of two standalone platforms?
Yeah, so our channel manager software updates to our website and people can book direct through there. We also have situations where we have, insurance companies, for example, where they need to place people for a month while they're doing repairs on a house. And they'll always come to me directly and I can book them direct, which means I can discount it because I'm not paying platform fees. So that's a win-win. So I'd suggest to anyone who wants to make a booking, try and go direct to the host if you can, because you'll usually get it at a cheaper rate because they're not paying platform fees. Not all hosts can do direct bookings, but it's really, we love our direct bookings and we've really managed to build it quite significantly over the last 12 months.
And I'm assuming the very, very final larger fee is the fee to you as sort of managing and controlling that. So what are the typical fees? Is there a sort of initial setup fee? Is there a fee that you charge for the buying and sort of setting up? And then the ongoing management fee? What's the rough guide for that? You don't need to give us your actual numbers.
But just I don't care about giving fees. It doesn't worry me.
Fees are the fees are the fees. Right,
the fees are the fees. So generally most hosts will charge anywhere between 15 and 25%.
Right.
I charge 20 plus GST, but I only charge it on what the owner ends up with. So, what the example I gave before,
great.
$1,000 minus out the cleaning fee, minus out the Airbnb fees, they end up with $750. I charge my 20% on that $750. So I'm not taking money off money they don't earn, right? Whereas a lot of other hosts will charge less, but they'll charge it on the gross amount.
Right.
So very different. It's just the way I do it. I think it's cleaner and it's fairer. I do charge a initial listing fee, just a couple $100. It takes me about a day to set up a listing. It's really complicated. And then you've got to set up your calendar at least 12 to 2 years in advance with all the public holidays and school holidays and increased prices and everything like that. And all the messaging. And then I charge, anything else I do is $100 an hour plus GST. So if you want me to go style your property, that's what I charge. If you have a terrible guest and I need to do an insurance claim, I've never had to, so it's great.
Touch wood.
Then
that was going to be one of my questions. Because that's the horror stories we hear.
I don't worry, I've had some dodgy
parties and all that. We're going to get to that. We'll get to that.
But yeah, that's my fees are really easy. They're easy to understand. I try not to overcomplicate it.
Great.
Hayley, we started this part of the conversation by saying at headline level, we're 2x to 3x the income, and then we've just spent the last little bit saying, but here's a bit that helps to better understand the net. Some people don't want to pay a professional like you, Hayley, and they want to have a swing themselves. But what I think they underestimate is the hidden tax or the cost of their own energy and the effort that they're not factoring in. Because I live in a coastal town, you know that, and a few of my mates have got some properties locally that they put into the short-term pool. But I've got one in particular who is down the Great Ocean Road. So these 2-night minimums and things that you'll talk to, and maybe we could talk about minimums as well that in your experience, but because she was giving up family time to go and drive 2.75 hours to go and clean it herself. So that then she could save the money on the cleaning. And I'm like, well, what about the fuel bill that's cost to go and to save the money on the cleaning? And then I said to them, well, why don't you find someone locally that you can, it's a bit of pocket money that they can do the cleaning, they don't have to travel and all that sort of stuff, and then tried a bit of that, and then it was unreliable. So I think it's, what we want to do is go, okay, there is potential here, but it's not something that you go in with blindly without sort of understanding that headline talks about lots of more revenue, but in the detail, we all want to get back to the net position. What's the net position of being long-term? What's the net position of being short-term? and how much of an additional benefit that does that provide you? Because would you find a lot of people that you probably take over in the end go, oh, this hidden tax that I didn't realise, I just want to get rid of that?
Yeah, a good manager should pay for themselves, in my opinion. Kind of like if you get a good selling agent, they'll pay for themselves because they'll get your higher return. So what I find, and I've taken over properties from owners where it's just got too hard. You know, you're getting the questions at 10 o'clock at night that they don't want to answer. The other thing is that because I'm proactively managing the properties and looking at my pricing every day, a lot of owners just set it and set and forget, and they miss things. You know, if there's an event that's announced in the area, you know, Tay-Tay, big example, Tay-Tay tickets. As soon as Tay-Tay was announced, I upped my pricing by triple, and I was booked out within an hour, the whole of Melbourne. So, you know, a lot of people, if they're self-managing, wouldn't have got that, wouldn't have kept on top of that, and they lose money. So I do find that when I have a client come on and I say, how much money have you been making? And they tell me, I'm like, I can do a lot better than that. Yeah. So if I can do better, I'm paying for myself.
Yeah.
Am I showing my age, Ben? Is Tay-Tay, is that Taylor Swift?
Yes. Come on. Even I knew that.
How's that possible that you knew that? Probably Jane helped you out on that one.
Best concert ever. Amazing.
Yeah, my wife did try and get the tickets, but I didn't realise it was Tay-Tay. So there you go.
Tay-Tay.
Hey, one of the things I think would be great is where's the sweet spot for location? Because the headline act is coastal locations, but you just talked. Taylor Swift's not doing concerts down in Torquay; she's doing it in the MCG, right? So where have you seen patterns over the journey? Because you know the coastal locations are great in seasonal, but is it better to be your couple of apartments in Fitzroy for consistent demand, or what have you observed?
So I think it's important to work out what the investment strategy is for the client. So, you know, I've got one in St Leonard's that doesn't do so well. And I actually said to Yona, put on long term. She goes, oh, but I want to use it a couple of times a year and I don't care if it doesn't do that well. I'm like, okay, well, if you're happy to kind of hold it and then just have that peak during that December, Jan, and maybe Easter and a few other long weekends, and that's fine. Like, we're happy to manage it. But she then said, well, can you go and find me an apartment in town that I could own in kind of Richmond, South Yarra, because yours do really well there, and then I'll have both. So I'll have a really good high return on this one, and then I'll have just, you know, been able to use this one. I'm like, yep, that's fine. So she's been looking for a little while. So, you know, depending on the strategy, if you're in a holiday location, particularly around Victoria, it hasn't been great this year, just with the cost of money and how and everything. People just aren't spending the money that they were. So we have had a real lull this year just in those sort of locations, but my Melbourne properties have gone great. I've also got a couple.
That's how this conversation started. I said to you, what's going on down in Torquay? And you went, rubbish, it's flat. I'm like,
at the moment, and I actually haven't even got bookings for this Christmas yet, which usually I would by now. I've got a couple, but I'd usually be almost booked out by now. So it's going to be a conversation with the owners that, hey, if you want to be booked this year, we're going to have to drop the pricing. Yeah. And that's just reality. Yeah, it's just reality.
There's no sun in summer in Victoria.
I could have told you that.
A lot of people are going overseas at the moment because it's cheaper. So I've also got a couple of properties in Cheltenham and Frankston that I manage, and I wasn't sure how they'd go, and they've gone really, really well. One of my properties in Frankston, the owners made $62,000 last year, so which is really, really good, and I get a lot of long-term stays, a lot of direct bookings, a lot of insurance where they've got to, you know, move them into a home while they're repairing houses. So yeah, we've got some really interesting properties on the portfolio, which is good. But if you want consistent income, then you're looking. My areas would be, you know, anywhere around the city fringe. So South Yarra is great, Richmond's brilliant, Fitzroy is great. All of those sort of areas are really, really good. But again, you've got to make the properties different than some of the others just to make them stand out. It's really, really important.
Give us a tip. What's one or two things to make it different? I've got a property I'm giving you in let's say Richmond.
Yep.
What do I got to do to make it different?
just style it really well, make the photos look good, make it pop. Like my Richmond one, I bought a velvet blue couch and it's so comfortable. It's just awesome. And I bought really cool industrial furniture, and then I bought a Smeg limited edition Coca-Cola fridge because it matched all the colour in the kitchen and it popped, and people just go, oh, this is so cool. So little things like that, like you actually just go, okay, how can I make this property stand out? So don't just go to don't just go to IKEA and buy really cheap stuff and whack it in there and just go, there's a plant and off you go. You got to have things that pop and make it a little bit different to stand out.
I couldn't help when you said before you got to have a good feel and style, and I think that sounds so good, but I got zero feel and style, and my wife has amazing feel and style. So it's really all comes down to a little bit of skill and a bit of sense. Can you imagine me and Ben cutting laps around IKEA, thinking what we know what to do, how to furnish it, versus our wives? So, and speaking specifically for my wife, she's got a real talent in that. So
we'll just go and eat the meatballs, mate, in the
go straight to the meatballs. So I think that's another value add that people need to think about. Whereas having someone, because it's all about the hook, it's all about the photos, it's all about how you get attention in the first place to try and get more volume of people making inquiries, so you get a better chance of having some demand as well. So it's just these little nuances of style that if you're not good at, you're better off finding someone who is good at it to make sure you do maximise your potential.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean you're spending thousands and thousands of dollars on it, but you just want to get a few things that just make it feel like home.
Yeah. Bringing a theme through, I think, is what you're sort of talking about, whether it's retro or whatever you're trying to do. Yeah. Hey, where I want to take the conversation now is around regulation. We know that obviously our great community spans all over Australia and also internationally as well in terms of our listener base. But what I'm interested in is, obviously we've seen local councils like in Byron and that type of thing really restrict the number of days, obviously Sydney Council as well, and Sydney rules. So what can we just go around the grounds in terms of getting a sense of what sort of things we need to be aware of around? Is there any council restrictions, and where would we find that information out if we weren't quite sure?
Yeah, so council's definitely a good step. I encourage my owners just to jump on and make sure. The other thing is body corporates. So if you're part of an owners corporation, it can be really difficult.
Good point.
Particularly with key safes and access and all of that sort of stuff. So you always have to check with the owners corporation to make sure it's allowed, because I had one property, for example, where the owner wanted to come to me and I said, can we, put a key safe? Yeah, no problem, it's fine. Then she checked with body corporate, they're like, nah. So we had to look at alternative arrangements, which is doable, but it can be tricky. Every state does have different rules coming in, and there's a lot of pressure on this space as well. The long-term or the short-term space has really had not a lot of regulation or rules. Yeah. So, in Victoria, for example, you've got to do the safety checks, you've got to do minimum standards, all of that. We've got none of that in the short-term space. So it really, there is things coming, I believe, to Victoria in particular, apart from that 7.5, but we are going to see some form of regulation. I actually think it does need to be regulated in a lot of ways, not as much as the long term, but I think there should be some more rules and regulations that come in as well. But it's really interesting.
To start with body corporate, check the council websites in terms of what's allowable, what's not allowed. How do they police such regulations like this? The what is it, 120 days in New South Wales or Sydney or something like that? Or
Byron's 60 and New South Wales looks like it's 180 days.
180 days.
So a lot of those areas, they actually need to get permits to operate. Right. So they can then, check with how often they've got them on. I'm in a lot of Facebook groups for short term. Yeah. And, in New South Wales in particular, people are like, oh, they never check, so we're fine, we just keep going. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's not a recommendation by us in terms of break the rules. We're just sort of that's what you've observed on Facebook.
I have, yeah. So a lot of these regs get brought in, but I'm not sure what the following is then. We really don't have a lot in Vic, and they were talking for a long time there about capping the CBD. So I think that'll probably come in at some point in time. But I know some of the caps, the way they work, I think it might be New South Wales, where they're allowed 180 days, but any stays over 21 days don't count to the cap. So when I actually did my figures on my properties, because I get a lot of long-term stays, although I'm 250 days a year, whatever it might be taken, when you actually drill it down to how many nights that is, if you take off those longer stays, I'm well under a cap. So I think we're just going to take it on area by area and case by case scenario.
Got it. And do you get reach outs for like those longer stays, obviously those insurance claims and those people who are renovating and so forth? Do they, I mean, what's the advice to the consumer? Is it to reach out to the owner and say, hey, what if I stayed 40 nights? Would I get a discount on the current pricing?
Yeah, definitely. We have people that just book. I had one that booked a 89-day stay, just booked. I got this stay come through and I'm like, is this legit? It was I had another one that was 90 days.
That's an insurance claim, right?
No, it actually wasn't. It was an NDIS stay.
Oh.
So teaching people to live independently. It was really interesting. I had another one which was an international person needed to come for work for 3 months. It was $27,000. The owner kept saying, are they still going ahead? I'm like, they haven't cancelled. They were great. Yeah. Awesome guests. So, we have really interesting people that stay for long periods of time as well.
Yeah, okay. Well, there is a tip, though, for those people who want to stay for a longer period of time. Ask the question. No harm to barter and, see what that looks like. As opposed to government money that you've just heard flow through the system, and that all costs our NDIS program. No wonder it's over budget again. Another little classic story.
That was I've only had one of those.
Yeah. Well, let's hope there's not too many more happening of those around the country. Oh, God.
Hayley, short-term stay gets a fair political mention because we're in a rental crisis and they see it as the enemy to housing people long-term. You've been on both sides of the fence. You've been involved in longer-term for a very long time. Yep. You've now more recently in short-term. With your unique vantage point on that part of the political discussion, what's your 2 cents?
Do you know what? You see some articles that go, it has no effect, and you have other articles that say it's ruining the system. It's really interesting. I think it does come down to area as well, how many available properties there are. There is a housing shortage, which we know of at the moment in various locations. I do have some owners that will have properties on over peak period. So, for example, in Geelong, and then they'll take up a 6 to 8 month lease in between. So they're only wanting to do them for those summer periods as well. It is. I think there's space for both. I do think they need to have some form of regulation. I think they need to, really know how many properties, maybe approve a certain amount of properties per area, per annum or something like that. I do think there is space. For me as an investor, I will go where the money is. So if I have a drop in the short-term market, for example, for my Fitzroy properties, I would bring them back to long-term market if I believe I'm going to get more money out of that way. So I don't mind which side I'm on. Just at the moment, financially, my properties are performing better on the short term.
Sorry, you go, Hayley.
The other thing I liked, talking about regulation again, let's talk about WA, right? So WA's got an incentive to bring owners from the short-term market to long-term by giving them $10,000 bonus. And I think it's $5,000 at the start and then $5,000 at the end of 12 months or something like that. If that came in Vic, rather than using the stick approach of 7.5% tax, give them a carrot of $10,000, bring back to long-term, I think you'd see a lot of people come back.
And the only problem with Vic is everyone's selling down here, Hayley. They're not coming back. They're actually juggling the 133 reforms as well as the land tax bill. Don't get me on a rant. Yeah. But to Bryce's question earlier and to your point you made, there was one of the more recent longer-term studies that's just been reported, I think, about the last 3 months around the impact of short-term stay on the over broader supply of rental accommodation. And I was talking to Nicola McDougall from Pippa about that because she's sitting on that steering committee. And the findings were it had no material impact. So now, obviously, that's one market. To your point, it might be different in other markets. But it sort of makes sense, right? I mean, this is the whole idea of having an open market. The market will decide what the market needs, right? And if there is an arbitrage or an advantage, that advantage will eventually be soaked up with market forces. That's how open markets work. So as much as, yes, we all agree that a minimum standard of regulation is important, you don't want to over-regulate it, because all you do is adding cost in the system. And that cost helps nobody in terms of, it doesn't make the consumer pay less, and it certainly doesn't make the owner earn more. So you've got to get, you want to start with minimum regulation and then add to it if you see issues in the system. What we've got now is ideology trumping common sense in a lot of aspects in terms of the reforms that are going on around the country.
Yep. And some of these coastal locations, for example, there aren't hotels.
Yeah.
So if you don't want to stay in a caravan park, where do you stay? If you want to go away with your family, you don't necessarily want to get a one-bedroom hotel room, 5 family members all in their little hotel rooms. You want to be in a home. You want to be sharing the experience. So, I believe that the short-term market offers good economy for those areas where otherwise people couldn't come. So
if you don't get that income in, you don't get growth of that little society, that little regional centre. The money flowing in from the external is critical for the growth of that community.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just the experience too. I mean, we just spent some time traveling through Europe, and we did a lot of short-term stay, and we got to stay in parts of town that the hotel market doesn't cater for, and we got to get a more authentic experience that comes from it. We did that in Rome, we did that in Venice, we did that in Cinque Terre, we did it in Lake Garda. So it just gave us another wonderful experience. So hey, my final question for you, Hayley, is around, okay, so people have been listening to this, and they hopefully we've given them some balance, right? There's a bunch of you that should consider it, there's a bunch of you that shouldn't. If you are considering it, you can get 2x to 3x, but don't forget to figure out the cost. So hopefully there's some balance there, right? But just to round it out, can you give us your top 2 stories? The number one story that was successful, someone implemented it and it was a raging success, and then maybe what do you call your bottom? Okay, we'll just call it the bottom story, where someone implemented it and it didn't work out for them, just so that we can have a couple of stories for people to ponder. And we get that you're the person who's advocating that this is the way to go. But just, for our audience, let's give them some balance. Your top story and your bottom story on experience for short term.
Yeah, so I've got a couple of really good stories. One of them, though, I've got an owner who I've managed now for about 2 years, I think. And he's lovely, but he travels for work. So he does 6 weeks on, 6 weeks off. So that is a property that is never going to be on a long-term market, because it can't be. So he came to me and he said, look, I'm interested in doing it. I don't know if it'll make any money. Do you think it'll work? And I said, look, let's give it a go. I said, just give me a couple of months. We'll see how we go. He's made some really serious money while he's away at work. So he'll just message me and go, hey, Hayley, I'm going away. These are my dates. Open it up. So I open it up and I get the cleaner through just after he's gone to give it a once over. And then we are pretty consistently booked in that property. Like, it's been a really, really good result for him. So he's made another secondary income while he's not there. So I think last year it was about 30 grand or something like that. The year before was slightly better. But I had a little bit longer availability as well. So, something like that can really work. If you're traveling for work and your property usually just sits there vacant, can you make money out of it while you go? Because these are properties that aren't affecting that long-term market either. So that was a really good story. Bad story. Generally, our guests are really, really good. We very rarely will have issues, and it's really interesting. Some of the properties, though, can attract a less quality guest, depending on what sort of style the property is. I did have one property where I was working with an owner, and we just didn't have great results. It was in Abbotsford, But it did okay, but it didn't do fabulous. And I just said to the owner, look, go to a long-term market. You're going to get a better return. I've given it a crack for 6 months. I really do think that you're going to get a better return long-term. And he said, oh, do you know what? I just don't think the property is the right property for my portfolio. I'm going to sell it. And he did sell it. So that was all fine. There were no issues there. But yeah, you can always give it a go and see how it goes. But sometimes the properties just don't, you think they're going to do really well and they don't. And then properties where you go, I don't know about this one, and they end up going off like a cracker and you're like, oh, okay, well, I was wrong. So it is very hard to judge. One other thing is people really like unique stays. So I don't know, midlife crisis last year, I was overseas and I bought a bus. You might have seen it on Facebook. So I then spent 12 months renovating. I popped it in my paddock, and people just laughed at me and thought I was crazy and just went, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm going to put an Airbnb in my paddock. People love it. I've got horses, kangaroos, and they can sit around a fire pit, and I've got fairy lights, and it's gone really well. So all weekends are booked.
All that on your site. It looked fun.
Yeah, it's super fun. And, I didn't think I'd get a lot of people over winter, but I have. But I think during summer, I'm going to really be busy with that. And it's just making that secondary income for myself and providing something a bit different as well. But people are just like, oh, this is so cool. I'm like, yep. So, things like that, tiny houses, things that are a bit unique, I think is a space where this is also going to, having that unique.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I definitely agree with that. Hey, just a quick one on the person who's potentially in the mining role or whatever. If that's a principal place of residence home, before you think that that's a good idea, please talk to your accountant, because obviously your capital gains exemptions could be at risk. Now, I don't know whether they were subletting, because obviously there's lots more questions in this space, but we are running out of time to sort of understand whether you can sublet. The other sort of observation I would have had is just quickly doing that bit of research in terms of understanding supply and demand. Is it as simple as getting onto something like Airbnb and counting the number of offerings and then sort of seeing how quickly they're getting sort of let to sort of get a sense of supply and demand for a particular location?
A little bit, but it's kind of hard too, because a lot of owners only put them on for a period of time. So you see all the calendar blocked, but it doesn't necessarily mean people are there. It could just be availability. Yeah. So I use a website called AirDNA, and I've got a subscription there, so I can jump onto that website and get some pretty good stats from there now.
Some data on that. Okay, that's a great tip. Okay, good.
In the area, how many properties, when are they available, what's the nightly rate, averages out. So there's a couple of websites like that. Price Labs is another one. But yeah, there's a few that you can subscribe to get that data as well.
Fantastic. So, Hayley, thank you so much for coming on and having a deep dive into the short-term rental stay market. It's fantastic. Obviously, there's some great information that we've shared today, but don't forget to do your research. Get a really good set of understanding and knowledge. Obviously, there's great operators like Hayley out there. You can potentially reach out if you've got a product that's simple and similar to what she's doing. All of those opportunities are available for you. We'll put a link in the show notes to be able to get in contact with Hayley. But thank you so much for coming on the pod today. It's been great having you and having you back. And yeah, thanks again for sharing all your knowledge and wisdom in this space.
No problem. Thank you.
There you go, Ben. Easy for people to think it's something that we should all just do. 2x, 3x, that sounds amazing. But it's very clear from that conversation from someone who's at the coalface of property investor, been in the long-term game, now in the short-term game, has said it is for some people and it isn't for others. And we need to just take that as a word of warning, because the idea that it's for everyone is just not true.
That's true. She was really honest about the pros and cons. I think we got that really clear. But it also highlights that if you're thinking about this, and Bryce obviously highlighted it throughout the course of the questions as well, is the time factor and then building that knowledge. So you can, again, outsource that to professionals like a Hayley, and, you can have open conversations about that as well in terms of what it looks like. So I really took a lot from that in terms of, how I'd be thinking about my approaches and how I do my due diligence in terms of looking at that and how I'd build out that knowledge, because again, a lot of gross income coming in there, but a lot of costs. And also that biggest cost of all is the trade-off of your time and your energy in terms of being able to manage that. And I think that's a really important lesson in the space. There's opportunity there for those people who commit and do the work, but there's also that trade-off in terms of your time to get that additional income reward.
Thank you, Hayley, for being so generous with your time and your wisdom and your experience there, Ben. As I said in that interview, I bumped into her on the Gold Coast, and I just asked her a casual question around how short terms are going, and she said flat. And I went, isn't that interesting? And so we started a little conversation. I thought, you know what, our audience needs to hear this. So I'm glad that we got that to happen today. So thanks again, Hayley. You've been generous 3 times now, which has been very, very good, and our community is all the better for it. Hey, my life hack today, Ben, is we talked last week about my holiday, Ben, but in the same time that I was away, you went away too. So you took the family overseas and had an experience which was wonderful for your family as well. But I've got a question for you, Ben.
Sure.
How was the packing? Did you have to move a fair bit, or were you in the same location for a fair bit of the time?
No, we moved pretty regularly. So I think we did 7 moves in 14 days, 14 nights. Yeah, 14 days, 13 nights. Yeah,
okay,
so we moved quite
that's
quickly.
An average of every second day, right? So you were doing a fair bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how did you pack? Were you organised with the packing, or was that just a chore every second day to just sort of grind through that?
Well, so we had one spot where we stayed for a long period, like 3 nights. So that was our long stay at the beach place that we're at. But the others, we just didn't unpack our suitcases. Like we literally just worked out of the suitcase. And so it really was just topping up in the laundry bag, right? That's sort of, and we did have, transport. So all we need to do was get it from the hotel or the place we were staying to the car, and then that was sort of taken care of. So hopefully I've answered your question. Did I give you
definitely. I mean, it's always good to know. But, Andrew and I and the kids, we were, for half of our holiday, we're on our own. And for the other half, we met with some good friends. And we stayed with them. We got the opportunity to get better accommodation because we all pulled in together and all that sort of stuff. So it was fun. But on the times when we were traveling, they were traveling. They were packing super quick, and we were like, "Oh, here we go for the grind." So, packing cubes, Ben. Packing cubes. Now, I just said to Matt, "How come?" And he goes, "Oh, mate, I just got these packing cubes. All my shorts going here, all my t-shirts going here, all my socks going here."
All up. Yeah.
And I'm thinking, "Oh man, I've used packing cubes in the past, but I didn't think that they were that helpful." But I got an epiphany that when you're doing long-term travel where you're on the move, those packing cubes would have been very, very
make
helpful.
A lot of sense. They make a lot of sense.
Particularly when you're packing not just for yourself, but you're packing for you'd like to think your teenage kids actually could do it for themselves, Ben, but it's like an exercise in insanity, just thinking that they're going to do that 100%. So my life hack today, folks, if anyone's about to head overseas or go on a holiday or whatever, consider the use of packing cubes, because when I go next, Ben, for a lengthy period of time, or when there's particularly lots of moving spots along the way, I'm definitely going to do that. So,
well, they work in the wardrobes as well. Like if you've also got a lot of space, a good way of saving space inside the wardrobe as well. So great little bit of advice there, mate. Well done.
You're adding some mayo to that. I appreciate that, mate. What's making property news?
Well, mate, at the start of the show, I did mention that, we were a little surprised with regards to the New South Wales government announcing at their state conference, the Labor State Conference in New South Wales, just basically told us what was going to happen with no grounds evictions. Now, that was a bit of a shock to me because tomorrow I'm appearing at a government inquiry in relation to setting up the infrastructure around what this might look like. So it's like, okay, so we've got our rules and regs. So I thought what I'll do, and the devil's in the detail here, but I just think it's really important for those people who aren't in the know. And obviously, it's the biggest rental market in the country, being Sydney and obviously the broader New South Wales state. So I just want to run through a couple of measures that they've got in here quickly. So the existing rules where a tenant is in fault, i.e. because of breach of lease, damage of the property, or non-payment of rent, that still is grounds for an eviction. There is some devil in the detail, and we want to get some wins in this space because the reality is that the damage has to be significant and that I don't think that's fair and reasonable. So hopefully we can get a bit of change there as we do some of our lobbying work. Where the property is being sold or offered for sale with vacant possession. So I mentioned this in the last week about the disastrous South Australian regulation, where you may not have access to vacant possession to realise the value of your property if you're forced into selling it for some reason. So listen, it sounds like New South Wales have got a common sense approach there, where significant repairs or renovations make inhabitation of the property too difficult or it will be demolished. Now, this is the critical clause here. If a homeowner seeks to renovate or repair the home, it cannot relist the property for a period of 4 weeks. Now, in some other legislation we're seeing out there, some of it is as ridiculous as 6 months, right? So they're really, trying to, to curtail that. So I think, if we're talking about that particular piece of work, if you're going to rewire the home or smart wire the home, and it's definitely unsafe if you're rewiring a home for people to have habitation, that could be an example where, you may then have to wait the 4 weeks before you can then potentially advertise it for releasing. If the property will no longer be used as a rental property, so i.e. change of use, that's an interesting one. The devil's in the detail there. I've got lots of questions about what that one will look like. Where the owner or their family intend to move into the property, and if the renter is no longer eligible for the affordable housing program or for a purpose-built student accommodation and they're no longer a student, that would also trigger the potential eviction there. So it could have been a lot worse, but still, I want to really highlight to people that there's still probably, and this is an estimate and guess from my point of view, there's still 20% of investors who will not like these changes, and that may deter them from investing in rental property going forward, or it might also deter them in investing in a state where the no grounds evictions are now currently in play, which now include Victoria, ACT, South Australia and New South Wales. And I've said all along, the state, and what we heard from Hayley as well, that the state that doesn't have that is cleaning up right now, and that's Western Australia. And they're seeing investors as part of the solution and not necessarily part of the problem. So I'll report back in terms of how my 45-minute appearance at the committee goes tomorrow. And see where that goes. And look, I have had a reach out from the government as well to have further dialogues in this space. So it's good to see that we're in the conversation, because they talk about these, 16,000 submissions and all of this feedback that we've got. And I asked a direct question. I said, so who's representing the owners? Like which group? And they said, isn't it the property manager? I said, no, we employ the property managers. So who's representing? Is it the industry, like the peak industry? No. So, PICA plays an important role in being that united voice for the actual property investor, not the industry, but the actual owner of the property. So we'll continue to advocate that voice, and that's why we need you to join the association if you're not already a member. $5 for a year or $20 for 5 years, because without that, and when we're going to do a data story soon around what's actually trending in the property space, we've got the latest ATO data. So we're going to do a deep dive of that in an episode in the next few weeks or so, where I'll explain to you what are the challenges and what's potentially happening in that space. Now, finally, Bryce, before I go, and I know I'm on a little bit of a roll here, everything to do with what's happening in the property investment space and the appetite for investment in property, it's very clear that there's less and less appetite to invest in property based on some of the changes that have been occurring. Now, every year we do a property investment sentiment survey, which is managed and controlled by the Property Investment Professionals Australia. This year, the survey, and I said this last year, but you can see why it's really important. This year is the most critical survey. It's the 10th anniversary of this survey. So we're building up an incredible amount of supporting data in terms of the things that are changing. And there are two major themes that are focused in this particular survey. One is around government regulation, i.e. some of their interferences and how that's making you feel as a property investor. And then the final one is about tenancy relationships. Tenants are very, very important, and they should be cared for by all property managers. But we want to again get a sense of where that sits in terms of what makes for a good tenant, and then ultimately what makes for a tenant that becomes a difficult relationship, and then where sort of evictions or disputes start to arise. So I cannot stress enough, in our show description notes, you will see a link to that survey. Please, it is going to take you between 20 and 30 minutes. It is an exhaustive survey by design, okay, because it then stacks up in the rigor in regards to any sort of opposing views. And if we get over 2,000 responses, which is our target, if we can get 3,000 responses, it will be outstanding. It will then stand up statistically reliable. And this is what the investor is telling the marketplace, including telling the government. So I cannot stress enough how important it is that you fill it out. If your wife or partner or husband, whatever they also fill out their views as well. I mean, if you own an investment property or you're going to potentially be a future investor, we have 2 lines. It's all built in the conditional logic. It's been rebuilt for the 10th anniversary. So there is a really, really important message here that I cannot underestimate or understate exactly how important it is that we have this data that we can present as part of the findings in terms of what's happening and the views of these investors, because effectively there are tens of billions of dollars of investment at stake here. And where that investment goes ultimately is where supply is going to end up. So it's absolutely critical at both the state and federal level that we have this survey information. We do it once a year in August, and it's literally started today. So please fill in that survey, and we'll get started in terms of getting those responses together. And Bryce and I in the past have done results of those surveys. We'll also share some of the insights that we've gleaned from those surveys. So please fill in that survey where you can. Thanks, Bryce, for giving me the floor.
No worries. I think I think what you're really saying is anyone who's just heard that, please don't be the person that says someone else will do that. Please be the person back in the mindset minute that we had at the beginning of the show, where someone got out of the audience. There was a bunch of people who put their hand up and said that it applies to me. It's kind of a metaphor for what you're trying to get here. One person got out of the seat, grabbed the $50, but there was a bunch of other people put their hand up. I really want to appeal to the people who put their hand up and say, yeah, that's really important. I reckon we should do something about it. Can you be the person that actually takes the action as well as the person who gets out of the chair? Because let's be honest, Ben, to get 3,000 with the download numbers that we have on this podcast alone, we should smash 3,000 based on the amount of property investors who listen to this podcast. So please do not have inertia on this one. Ben is giving up a lot of, I promise you folks, behind the scenes, Ben's not getting paid. He's tipping in his own money. He's tipping in his own time. I promise you there is nothing commercially advantageous for Ben to do this work other than a genuine passion for the industry and advocating on behalf of the property investor. So if that's you, can you please help him out and fill in that survey? So links all in the show description, Ben.
Yeah, thank you, Ross.
Hey, before we sign off, Ben, we received something that was pretty foreign to us during the week, and it was actually we didn't receive it in our inbox, in our email inbox. We didn't receive it on we didn't receive it as a direct message on our social media. In fact, it sort of went way back to probably the 90s, and it was very prevalent in the 80s, Ben. So some people listening to this weren't born back then. But you and I received a letter in the mail.
We did. We received a letter in the mail along with some lovely little
gifts.
A nice little gift as part of that letter in the mail in a box that came with it.
Let's set that up for people who are not watching. People who are watching it will see this, but people who are listening, let's set up the gift, Ben. There was a bag of dark chocolate almonds.
Yes.
Right? And it was sitting on top of, how would we describe this, Ben? It's like, if you can imagine,
it's
bright
shredded cardboard paper. Yeah.
It was shredded so that underneath it actually looked like these chocolate almonds were sitting in a bed of grass. Okay,
yes.
So we've set the scene. All right, we've set the scene. So this was, so I just want to shout out to, I hope I don't butcher your surname, but Tom Forrestal. He's the managing director of a wonderful business in South Australia called Melba's Chocolates. So he took the time to write us a letter, Ben, and this is what it said. Dear Ben and Bryce, firstly, I'd like to say a massive thank you for the time and effort you put into your podcast. For a car audio student such as myself, gosh, I love that. A car audio.
It's so good, isn't it?
Zig Ziglar used to call it Automobile University, but a car audio student such as myself, it has been pure gold, and I spruik it, in brackets, sorry, dirty word, to anyone with even the mildest interest in property investment. My name is Tom, and I'm the second-gen owner of our family chocolate and confectionery company in South Australia, Melbourne. I've enclosed, this is the bit, Ben. I've enclosed some dark almonds for you, Ben. Feedback welcomed. And some green grass underneath for you, Bryce. Sorry, couldn't help myself. So,
That was, mate. When I first read that, I'm absolutely burst out laughing. There is someone who's cutting the lap through our pod and can get
there is
all of the
no
great
way
stories about me
anyone
eating
who
cake and
hasn't
you
cut a
eating
lap
grass.
doesn't understand that gag, right?
Yes, that's right.
Thank you, Tom. There's clear evidence that you are a long-term listener.
Yeah.
I'm 36 and I've been a property investor since I was 19, thanks to the help from my father and late mother, who were avid property investors. For all intents and purposes, Mum and Dad basically forced my sister and me to purchase adjoining properties. They fronted us a deposit each and jumped in as guarantors. We got to renovating straight away, tenanted them out, and never looked back. I now have 3 residential investment properties, a commercial property, and a business employing 36 people, all thanks to the clever push from Mum and Dad 16 years ago. Well done, Mum and Dad. You are legends.
Yeah, brilliant.
I learned about your podcast from one of our young staff members who is doing his best to get on the property ladder himself. Over the years, we've encouraged and supported several employees to invest in property. Take a bow, Tom. And it's always a very proud moment to see them get their keys to their own bit of paradise. Although some might think I'm a seasoned property investor, I'm happy to admit that I learned a great deal from your podcast, and in the wonder of hindsight can easily say there is plenty I would do differently, having now binged almost 300 TPC episodes in just a few months. I'm writing to you now for the very happy reason that I've met the woman, in brackets Holly, I'd like to build a life with, and I think we could benefit greatly from building a plan. The complexities around how entwined my debt structure is, and as well as the fact that neither Holly nor I have done any joint investing before, reinforces that it is time to get professional help planning our future. I'd love it if you'd put me in contact with your team, which we've done, and so that Holly and I can successfully plan an entry into the PPR market together. I also want Holly to feel like I'm not forcing anything and that it's a we thing. I love it. I just wanted to thank you personally and send you a gift anyway. Warm regards, Tom Forrestal. Hey, wasn't that nice? Except for the gag about the grass, Ben, because I don't remember getting any chocolates, but a bit of feedback around the chockies.
Mate, the chocolates are here in the office. The staff are enjoying them, and the feedback, they are very good. Like, it's really important. Like, the almond needs to make sure that it blends in with that chocolate flavour. So they are first class dark almond and chocolate. So thank you to the Melbourne Chocolate and Confectionery Company, and of course to Tom. Now, I know he's reached out to you, and I've also spoken to him as well. Had a good chat with him earlier in the week, and I mean, there's more to the mum story as well. And I think, in terms of understanding that, unfortunately his mum's no longer with us, but when she was diagnosed with her cancer, that allowed payment from, this is why we say, defence in terms of protect you first, right? So there was a payout based on that diagnosis, and then the mum has obviously generously shared that with the family, to build legacy. And so, I mean, just an incredible story. And then obviously to then, lose his mum, is just, very, very sad as part of that story. But it provided a leg up to allow him and his sister to get started on their property journey. So forever, mum will be recognised for the value that she's added, not just in being the best mum in the world, but also in terms of the financial benefits she was able to pass on based on having those protections in place.
Well, let's be honest, Ben, and the message to you, Tom, is your mum would be looking down at you with great pride about your character, on how you are paying it forward to the people in your team and helping those around you. So, Ben, just wanted to highlight that for the benefit of our community. There's so many wonderful messages laced into to that message, but it was just a nice little treat for you and I just to get a letter in the mail with some very generous gifts as well. But the point of the story was there's some learnings there for the community as well. So thank you, Tom. We well and truly appreciate your effort. But it's been a big show, Ben. We've covered a bit of the ground. Had a wonderful guest. You've talked about the incredible importance of rallying property investors with a common cause to help you out. And of course, we got to finish it there with some incredible dark chocolate almonds and a related story. So, mate, until next week.
Knowledge is empowering, Bryce, but only if you act on it.
See you next week, folks.